Hello students, welcome to your next science class. So today in class 4, we will be continuing with the chapter number 4, solid, liquid and gases, and the topic for today is separation of substances. So let's get started. So children, the first topic is substances and their types. So there are two types of substances present all around us, soluble substances and insoluble substances. Now let us see what are soluble substances and insoluble substances. So firstly talk about soluble substances. So soluble substances are those substances which mix or dissolve completely in a solvent and they make a solution. So as you can see that I have sugar with me, and let us try and dissolve it in water and see that whether does it mix or not. So I am taking a little sugar and dissolving in water. Let us see, and you will see that after some time the sugar dissolves completely in water. So what does it mean? That sugar is a soluble substance because it has mixed in water, that is a solvent, and what it has formed? It has formed a solution, a sugar solution. Now let us try with another substance like salt. Let us dissolve salt in water and see whether it mix or dissolve completely in water. So I am taking salt and dissolving in water. So after dissolving, you will observe that salt also, like sugar, mix completely in water. So salt is also a soluble substance. And again, what does it make? It makes a salt solution. So children, soluble substances are those substances which mix or dissolve completely in water or any solvent and they make a solution. So sugar and salt both are example of soluble substances as they both mix and dissolve completely in water to make a solution. Another type of substances are insoluble substances. So those substances which do not mix or dissolve in water completely are known as insoluble substances. So the first example which we have taken is sand. So let us try and dissolve this sand in water and see that does it dissolve in water or no. So I have taken some sand and I have mixed it in water, and after stirring also you will observe that the sand does not dissolve in water. See, the sand has not dissolved and it has settled down at the bottom. So this clearly suggests that sand is a insoluble substance. One more example of insoluble substances is tea leaves. Everybody of you I know is aware of what are tea leaves. So children, they are also insoluble in water. Let us try dissolving them in water and observe that do they mix or not. After stirring, you will observe that just like sand, they also settle down at the bottom and do not mix. So what does it tell? That it is also insoluble in water. So we can say that sand and tea leaves are example of insoluble substances as they do not dissolve in water completely. Now the next topic is separation of substances. So let us see that how our soluble and insoluble substances are separated and what are the different processes involved in their separation. So firstly, talk about the separation of insoluble substances. Children, insoluble substances can be separated with the help of three processes: sedimentation, decantation and filtration. So let us talk about them in detail. So let us firstly see the process of sedimentation. Children, this process is basically used to separate the heavier and insoluble substances from water. For example, sand and tea leaves, which we have already seen that they are insoluble in water. So when you mix them in water and let them stand undisturbed for some time, you will observe that sand and tea leaves will settle down at the bottom of the beaker or any container because they both are heavier, so they will come down. Whereas the water, being lighter, will make a layer at the top. So this process, when heavier and insoluble substances settle down at the bottom and water comes at the top, is known as sedimentation. For example, you might have observed your mothers cooking rice and pulses. So before cooking, they wash them in the water thoroughly. So you might have observed that rice and pulses, being heavier, settle down at the bottom and water comes at the top, which your mother drain out. So this is also an example of sedimentation. So now let us talk about the next method of separation of insoluble substances, that is decantation. So children, after sedimentation, the liquid which is separated from the heavier insoluble substances, we try to separate them by pouring it into another container or glass. As you can see here, we have sand in water, and due to sedimentation, the sand has settled down at the bottom and the water has collected on the top. So now we are trying to pour this water from the top into another container or glass slowly and without disturbing the sediment. So what you have observed is that I have transferred the water from the top into another glass, but the sand still remains in the first glass. So this process of pouring or transferring the liquid from the first container into another container without disturbing the sediment is known as decantation. So after the process of sedimentation and decantation, let us talk about the next method of separation, that is filtration. So children, in this method, a solution of insoluble substance is passed through a special paper which is known as filter paper. As you can see in front of you, there is a round paper kept, which is a filter paper. So in filtration, we will be using filter paper because this filter paper has small holes which will allow the water to pass through, but the insoluble substance will be trapped in this filter paper. Here we will also be using funnel, which you can see in the picture. So the filter paper will be kept in the funnel, and then we will pour a solution containing insoluble substance through the filter paper. So let us see how do we perform filtration. So when we perform filtration, we need to put the filter paper in the funnel this way, and then we have to keep this funnel inside any beaker or a container, like here we have a glass. Then we will pour this solution of insoluble substance, that is sand, into this apparatus. Slowly, and you will observe after some time that the water will slowly pour down and the impurities like sand will remain on the filter paper. So now after pouring, you can observe that the sand is collected on this filter paper because it was big enough to pass through the small holes of the filter paper, but water being very smaller passes through the filter paper, and you can see it is collected in the glass kept below. So this process, when we use any filter to separate insoluble substance from its water solution, is known as filtration. Children, an example of filtration which we use in our homes every day is the separation of tea leaves from tea using a strainer, which we call chalni in Hindi. So when we use strainer is actually acting as a filter here, because as you can see it has small holes in it. So when we pour the tea through the strainer, what you will observe is the tea leaves being bigger, or we can say insoluble, remain trapped on the strainer, and the liquid tea passes through the strainer into the another container. So this is also an example of filtration which we use in our daily lives when we strain out tea with the help of a strainer. So lastly, let us talk about the separation of soluble substances. Children, soluble substances like salt can be separated from its solution by a process of evaporation, which you have already studied in your last tutorial. And as we all know that when we heat water, it changes into water vapor. Similarly, when salt solution will be heated, water being liquid will evaporate and change into water vapor. And what will be left behind? Salt crystals. So this way you can separate soluble substances like salt from its solution by the process of evaporation. So that's all for today, children. Now let us summarize what we have learned today. So we have two types of substances: soluble substances and insoluble substances. Example of soluble substances are salt, sugar, etc. An example of insoluble substances are sand, tea leaves, mud, and so on. Then we discussed about the methods of separation and have seen that insoluble substances can be separated by the processes of sedimentation, decantation, and filtration. And soluble substances like salt can be separated by the process of evaporation. So children, I hope the topic is clear to you. So kindly complete your copy work which will be sent to you in your class groups. Take care, stay home.